Welcome to Life Stories. Imagine growing up in a home where love and attention are not given equally. Where one sibling is the shining star while the other is barely noticed. This is the story of Olivia, a girl who spent her childhood in the shadow of her twin sister, Emily. Despite years of trying to earn her parents' love, Olivia soon discovered a painful truth: she was never truly wanted. But instead of letting their rejection break her, she chose a different path, one of resilience, independence, and self-worth. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story with Life Stories. I came into this world just minutes after my twin sister, Emily, but those few minutes might as well have been years given how differently our lives unfolded. From the outside, we seemed like a typical middle-class family in a quiet Ohio suburb. My mother, Margaret Evans, was a successful real estate agent, always impeccably dressed with her designer suits and perfectly manicured nails. My father, William Evans, ran his own small accounting firm, spending long hours buried in tax forms and spreadsheets. To anyone looking in, we were an ordinary, respectable family, but behind the carefully curated Christmas card smiles and the neat front lawn, there was a divide so deep it shaped the very core of who I became. From as early as I can remember, Emily was the golden child. She had a natural radiance, an effortless way of drawing people in, and my parents basked in her glow. When we were 5, I started noticing the subtle differences in how we were treated. It wasn't just that Emily got more, it was that she was made to feel like she deserved more. I remember one shopping trip in particular. Our mother held Emily's hand tightly as we walked through the department store, her heels clicking confidently on the polished floors. She picked up a pair of pristine white Nike sneakers, turning them over in her hands. "These will be perfect for you, sweetheart," she said, her voice filled with warmth. I stood next to them, waiting, hoping for a similar moment. But when she turned to me, it was only to hand me a pair from the clearance rack, shoes that looked fine but weren't special. "These should do for you, Olivia." The words were casual, but the meaning was clear. It was always like that. When birthdays came around, Emily's side of the cake always seemed bigger, her pile of presents taller. She received beautiful dresses from high-end boutiques, while I wore whatever was on sale at the nearest department store. When Emily got her ears pierced at 6, I wasn't even asked if I wanted mine done. When she started ballet lessons, I was told there wasn't enough money for both of us. And yet, somehow, there was always enough for Emily's growing list of activities: gymnastics, piano, art classes. At first, I tried to believe it wasn't intentional. Maybe they just didn't see it. Maybe I was imagining the imbalance. But deep down, I knew, the way they looked at her, with unfiltered adoration, their eyes lighting up at every word she spoke, was different from how they looked at me. When I spoke, their attention drifted, already moving on to something else. It wasn't the material things that hurt the most. It was the absence of recognition. The feeling of being an afterthought in my own family. Our childhood photos tell the story better than I ever could. Emily, always in the center, wearing a bright, ruffled dress. Me, somewhere in the background, dressed in something plain, barely acknowledged. Even the small details carried weight. Our shared bedroom had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. But Emily's side always had more. Even the universe above our heads played favorites. As we approached school age, I held on to the hope that things would change. Maybe, once we were in school, once teachers and other adults became involved, my parents would start to see us equally. Maybe they would finally see me. I still remember our first day of school. For once, we looked identical in our crisp uniforms, plaid skirts, white blouses, navy cardigans. I felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe now, at last, we would be equals. "Girls, smile," our mother called as she lifted the camera. But even then, her gaze wasn't on me. "Emily, honey, tilt your head a little to the right." Perfect. The familiar ache in my chest returned. Even in identical clothes, she found ways to make Emily shine brighter. At school, our teacher, Mrs. Thompson, sat us alphabetically, Evans and Evans, side by side. I was thrilled. For the first time, we would be treated the same. But outside of school, The old patterns only grew stronger. Every afternoon, our mother would pull up in her silver SUV. I would slide into the back seat, ready to tell her about my day. But she was always focused on Emily. Ready for dance class, sweetheart? She would ask, her voice bright and eager. And just like that, they were off, to ballet on Mondays, piano on Tuesdays, art on Wednesdays, gymnastics on Thursdays, drama on Fridays. I would watch them drive away before walking into our empty house. The silence was my only companion. So I threw myself into my studies. If I couldn't win their love, maybe I could win their approval. I sat at the kitchen table, methodically working through my math problems, practicing my spelling words, reading ahead in our textbooks. But no matter how many perfect scores I achieved, no matter how many gold stars I collected, my efforts barely earned a passing glance. One evening, I came home clutching an A+ on my history test, my heart pounding with anticipation. "Mom, I got an A+. I announced, holding up my paper like it was a trophy. "That's nice, dear," she replied absent-mindedly, barely looking up as she helped Emily unpack her dance bag. Then she turned, her voice suddenly animated. "Emily, show Dad the new routine you learned today." I watched as Emily twirled across the living room, our parents clapping and smiling like she had just performed at Carnegie Hall. I stood there, invisible, clutching my perfect paper that somehow meant nothing. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the stars on our ceiling, I wondered if I was foolish for still hoping things might change. If maybe, just maybe, they would one day see me the way they saw Emily. But I had no idea how wrong I was. Because the night that changed everything was just around the corner. The night started like any other. I had spent hours at the kitchen table, my notebook open, carefully going over my algebra problems. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of a car passing outside. Emily was already in bed, and our parents were in the den, where they often sat after dinner, sipping tea and talking in low voices. I had never paid much attention to their conversations before. They were always the same, discussions about the neighbors, about my mother's real estate clients, about my father's tax cases. But that night, something about their hushed tones made me pause. I stood in the hallway, just outside the den, my bare feet pressing into the cool wooden floor. At first, I caught only fragments, my mother sighing, my father sounding unusually tired. Then, as I leaned slightly closer, I heard my father's voice clearly. "Sometimes I wonder if we made a mistake." There was a long pause. My mother shifted in her chair. "What do you mean? Having twins?" he said, his voice heavy. "Emily would have been enough. She's everything we could want in a daughter. But two of them?" He let out a deep sigh. "I don't know, Margaret. It's too much." I felt something inside me crack, like a pane of glass splintering under pressure. My mother's voice was softer, almost wistful. "I know what you mean," she said after a pause. "Emily is special. She's meant for great things. But Olivia," another sigh, "she's just there. Just there." I couldn't breathe. All my life, I had felt like something was missing. Like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. I had wondered, hoped, prayed that one day they would look at me the way they looked at Emily. That they would finally see me. But now, standing in the dimly lit hallway, I realized the truth. They didn't want me. They never had. I don't know how long I stood there. My mind was blank, my body frozen. I clutched the notebook in my hands, my fingers pressing into the paper so hard that my knuckles turned white. Then, before they could say anything else, I turned and walked silently back to my room. I closed the door behind me, pressing my back against it. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, and my heart pounded in my chest like it was trying to escape. For years, I had tried so hard. I had worked tirelessly to be the best student, to be responsible, to be someone they could be proud of. But it had all been for nothing. Nothing I did would ever be enough. I didn't cry, not that night. Instead, something inside me hardened. I stopped trying to win their love. Instead, I focused on the one thing I could control, my future. The next morning, I walked into school with a new kind of determination. If my parents couldn't see me, then I would make sure the world did. My grades, already good, became exceptional. I poured myself into my studies, staying after school to work with teachers, reading ahead in every subject, perfecting every assignment. I didn't do it for them anymore. I did it for me. It didn't take long for people to notice. One afternoon, in English class, our teacher, Mr. Peterson, held up my latest essay. Excellent analysis, Olivia, he said. Class, this is exactly the kind of deep thinking I want to see. I felt Emily tense beside me, her pencil tapping against her desk in that irritated way she had when she was annoyed. I didn't look at her, but I could see from the corner of my eye the way her face flushed with frustration. Similar moments played out in other classes, math, science, history. Every time a teacher praised me, I could feel Emily seething beside me. It all came to a head one evening when I overheard her complaining to our mother. "The teachers are being mean to me," Emily whined. "They always praise Olivia and make me look bad. They're doing it on purpose." The next day, my mother stormed into school. I watched from the hallway as she marched straight into the principal's office. Her designer handbag swinging, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "I want to know why your teachers are discriminating against my daughter," she demanded. The principal, Mr. Williams, remained calm. "Mrs. Evans, I assure you, there is no favoritism here." "Then why is Olivia always getting praised while Emily is ignored?" my mother snapped. Mrs. Chen, our class teacher, stepped forward. "Mrs. Evans, let me show you something." She pulled out our progress logs and laid them side by side on the desk. "Here are both girls' records. Olivia consistently scores in the top percentile in all subjects." She hesitated. "Emily's grades are..." "Are you suggesting my Emily isn't smart?" my mother interrupted. "Not at all," Mrs. Chen replied carefully. "I'm merely pointing out that Olivia's academic achievements are..." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," my mother cut in, her voice rising. "You're all biased against Emily." No amount of evidence could convince her. When she came home that evening, she told my father that the teachers were clearly prejudiced against Emily. I didn't say a word. I just smiled to myself. For the first time in my life, I had something that Emily couldn't take from me, and I wasn't going to let it go. After that confrontation at school, my mother's frustration only grew. She couldn't understand how the daughter she had spent years placing on a pedestal was being overshadowed by the one she had dismissed as an afterthought. Emily, who had always basked in being the favorite, now felt something she had never truly experienced before: competition. Not that she ever saw it that way. To Emily, I wasn't competition, I was just a problem that needed to be handled. Her attitude toward me changed. She became colder, more dismissive. The teasing that had once been light and playful took on a sharper edge. "Oh my God, Olivia, you're such a nerd," she sneered one afternoon when I was reading in the living room. "Do you seriously enjoy studying that much? No wonder you don't have any friends." I didn't bother responding. I had long since stopped caring what Emily thought of me. But my mother hadn't. She hated seeing Emily upset. And if Emily was upset because of me, well, that was something that needed to be corrected. That was when the rules in our house started to shift. I was no longer allowed to bring up my achievements at the dinner table. If I got a perfect test score, I was expected to keep it to myself. If a teacher praised me in class, I was told not to rub it in. Meanwhile, Emily's activities, her ballet recitals, her art classes, her gymnastics competitions, remained the center of every conversation. By the time I was 16, I had stopped expecting any form of validation from my parents. I had stopped asking for pocket money. Tired of seeing Emily receive hundreds of dollars just for existing while I was handed scraps. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. I applied for a job at the Coffee Bean, a cozy little cafe just a few blocks from our house. It wasn't glamorous work, but for the first time, I had something that was entirely mine. The independence I felt with my first paycheck in hand was something I had never known before. Of course, Emily couldn't let me have even that small victory. "Oh my God," she gasped dramatically one morning, watching me button up my uniform. "You're actually going to be a waitress?" She laughed, shaking her head. "That is so common." Then, turning to our mother, she added, "Mom, Can you believe Olivia is going to serve people food? My mother made a disapproving noise but said nothing, instead sliding another $100 bill across the table toward Emily for her weekend shopping trip. That was when something inside me truly clicked. I remembered a phone conversation I had overheard years ago, my mother's voice sharp with anger as she yelled at someone on the other end of the line. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. You're embarrassing with your tiny house and your budget clothes. I've moved up in the world. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. But now, standing there, watching my mother slip money into Emily's greedy hands while barely looking at me, I realized something. She had been talking to her parents. The grandparents I had never met. That evening, while my mother and Emily were on yet another shopping spree, I snuck into my mother's home office. I rifled through her desk drawers, searching through old address books and documents. And then, under a section labeled DNC, Do Not Contact, I found it. An address. The next afternoon, instead of heading to my shift at the cafe, I took a bus to the older part of town. The house was small but well kept, painted a soft blue with a neatly tended garden in the front. It was nothing like the grand suburban home I had grown up in, but something about it felt warm. I stood at the front door, my heart pounding. What if they didn't want to see me? What if they were just like my parents? But then I thought of all the years I had spent feeling invisible. Feeling like I didn't belong in my own family. I had to try. I raised my hand and knocked. The door opened a moment later, revealing an elderly couple. The woman had gray hair tied back in a neat bun, and the man wore thin, wire-rimmed glasses. They looked at me with confusion at first, until I spoke. "Hi," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm Olivia Evans. I think you might be my grandparents." For a moment, there was silence, and then the woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Frank," she whispered, turning to the man beside her. "It's really her." Before I knew it, I was being ushered inside. And just like that, my life began to change. Sitting in my constitutional law class, I let my pen glide across the notebook, jotting down key points as the professor spoke. The lecture was engaging, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt like I belonged somewhere, not as an afterthought. Not as the shadow of my twin, but as myself. My phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. Probably a message from my study group or maybe from Jake, the guy from my psychology class who kept asking me to get coffee. A normal life. No drama. No endless comparisons. Just me, my studies, my friends, and a future stretching out ahead of me, full of possibilities. It had been weeks since I last spoke to my parents. After they tried to manipulate me into giving my car to Emily, I packed my bags and left. My grandparents had supported me every step of the way, ensuring I had everything I needed to thrive at Princeton. Unlike my parents, they saw me, they valued me, and for the first time, I knew what it felt like to be truly loved. My parents had tried to reach out, of course, but it wasn't because they missed me. It was because they realized they had underestimated the people they had so easily discarded. When my grandparents told them that everything, the investments, the wealth, the inheritance, was going to me, my mother's mask of control slipped. But it was too late. I had already left their world behind. Looking around the bright lecture hall, I took a deep breath. This was my fresh start. My own story to write. And for once, I was exactly where I was meant to be. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories.